Story 43. My devout Christian wife decided to cheat. I, 33M, met and married my wife Mieko, 35F, nearly a dozen years ago and have two beautiful young children. Our oldest is a boy and the youngest is a girl. They were born within a year of each other, as we wanted a family. We are both devout Christians and have loved the fact that our beliefs are so in line with each other. Although I consider myself to be pretty serious in my convictions, I would consider my wife to be a very strict Christian. She's the kind of person who never misses Sunday service or women's Bible study on Wednesday with people from our church. She also volunteers at the church, so she goes early to help set up the choir's music equipment and get the teleprompters up and running for the pastor. Her Bible sits on her nightstand next to our bed, and she reads it every day before going to sleep. Our marriage has been amazing, and my wife has been a wonderful mother to our two kids. We have gone to the same church for the entire time we've known each other. We were actually introduced by the pastor and his wife, who is also Asian. Our church is comprised of mostly Asians, and the sermon is given in English and Japanese. We have a large group of friends from church that are mostly from prior military families, where the husband was stationed in Japan or Korea, where they met their wives. Our problem started about 3 months before I found out that my wife had cheated on me. There was a time when Mieko went from being more social to being almost fanatical about Bible study. She would go back and forth like a pendulum on a clock, and it started to make me concerned. She was clinging to me during those fanatical times and actively tried to avoid me during those times when she was spending time socially with women from the church. Eventually, there was a day when she claimed to be going to Bible study on Wednesday like normal, but didn't return when she would normally be back home. I was getting worried after a couple of hours of her not responding to text messages when she finally called me. She told me that she was sorry, but she had gone shopping after Bible study and the car had broken down, so she was stranded. I told her I would call AAA for her and get a tow truck sent, and then I'd come meet her. She said she had already called AAA and they were coming. She said I didn't need to come and that she'd just get an Uber if they couldn't get the car running. This rang false to me because my wife was very frugal about spending money and there was no reason I couldn't just go get her. I told her I didn't want to waste the money and I'd come and get her. For some strange reason, she was being very distant and started getting angry with me for trying to help her. She then just told me to forget it and that she'd handle it. She showed up in our car about an hour later and simply told me that AAA had fixed the car. She couldn't tell me what was wrong, and she said they didn't tell her. I asked her if there was any paperwork, and she said they hadn't given her any. I didn't say anything and let it go. Mieko went straight into the bedroom and got into the shower, something she never does since she always bathes in the evening before bed. When she was done with her shower, she came out with a load of laundry and started it. Another item that was out of place was that she only ran the washer at night and then hung up the clothes to dry before going to bed. There were a lot of subtle but glaring inconsistencies in her behavior. This is behavior that has been in place for more than 10 years. Later, when we sat down for dinner, she was quiet and unusually unresponsive when I asked about her day and how Bible study went. Normally, she would go over what they had studied for the week and give me her opinions on the teachings. It was her way of including me in the Bible study since I didn't go. It felt like she was upset and needed some physical closeness. But when I tried to hug her later, she was cold to me and didn't return the hug. When I tried to kiss her at the end of the hug, she turned her face away and pulled out of my embrace. I was standing there looking at her as she moved away, and I know she could tell I was confused and hurt by her pulling away. I asked her what was going on, and she simply said she wasn't feeling well and went into the bedroom. This didn't feel right, so I decided to call the husband of the woman who hosts the Bible study. We hunt pigs together a few times a year on a piece of land he purchased. He answered the phone, and I asked him if anything strange happened today at Bible study. He said, "Not really, other than your wife skipped it today." I paused as this sank in, and my friend caught on. He said that Mieko had called his wife and told her that something had come up and she couldn't attend. I thanked him and hung up. When I confronted Mieko about lying to me about where she was and what she was doing, she started arguing with me. She got so upset that she stormed off into the bedroom to get away from my questions. I ended up going for a walk to help clear my head. It took me an hour before I was able to get my emotions under control. When I got home, Mieko was still in the bedroom. I walked into the bedroom and Mako was lying on the bed asleep, holding her phone. I walked around the bed, reached down and literally slipped the phone out of her hand and walked into the master bathroom, closing and locking the door. I sat on the toilet and opened her phone. We know each other's passwords. And there at the top of her chat history was a phone number with a set of initials. I opened the chat and it was a disaster. My wife had slept with this guy today, and he was thanking her for the special afternoon. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to myself. I read through her chat history and found that she had been talking to this guy for a month or so, and it started off innocently enough, but had soon gone to more personal exchanges. It looked like my wife had slept with him at least 2 times, and that coincided with her strange behavior. I texted his number from my phone, simply saying this was Mayeko's husband, and I'd like him to stop contacting my wife or there would be consequences. I took her phone, bent it in half, and threw it in the garage garbage can. When Mayeko woke up, she panicked and looked for her phone, but I ignored her questions about it. I spent the rest of the night on the couch and packed a few bags in the morning while Mayeko was in the shower. She walked out of the bathroom just in time for me to be zipping up the last suitcase and chased after me as I walked out of the house. I took our car and drove to a cheap motel near my work and got a room there. Since Mayeko had no way to actually contact me after I destroyed her phone, I didn't have any messages. I called the pastor of our church and told him that I was having a crisis in my marriage and asked if he had time to talk. He did, and we met up later that afternoon. When I met with our pastor, we sat in his office with the door closed for privacy, and I opened up with him about what I had found out. I told him the full story and even showed him the pictures of the text messages between Mayeko and AP. On the bright side, AP was pushing the relationship, and Mayeko seemed torn about what they were doing. On the realistic side, she was letting this mount her. She even told AP that she would not be seeing him again and that she would insist on me changing churches. That was a fact I had missed, and our pastor called out that AP was most likely someone from the congregation. The pastor said that he would consider what we discussed and spent the next couple of hours talking to me about my duty as a husband and as a Christian. He didn't lecture, he just provided guidance from the perspective of faith. I'm sure you'd rather not have me write out everything said. I'll paraphrase it as infidelity is bad, and one of the few circumstances called out in the Bible as grounds for divorce. As a matter of fact, there is a reference to it in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery. There are multiple scriptures that touch on a woman's duty as a wife along with a man's duty as a husband. I left the church and went home to think about what the pastor had said. Divorce isn't something that the church really condones, but there are reasons that are mentioned, such as adultery, abandonment, and abuse. I needed to take time to get my life in order. A few days passed and I lived in silence with my wife. Whenever she attempted to talk to me, I just shook my head and walked away. We functioned enough. Mayeko made meals and did work around the house. I went to work as always and came home every night. The one concession that I would not relent on is Mayeko sleeping in my bed. I made up the guest room and started moving her clothes into the closet while she stood there with a shocked look. For some reason, she thought I would just let her sleep next to me. Mayeko never replaced her phone, even though there was an old one in the kitchen junk drawer. We were barely speaking, and when we did, it was just the bare minimum needed. When Sunday rolled around, I got ready for church, and Mayeko had already gone to help set up like normal. I walked in and found a pew in the center, about halfway to the front. When my wife was finished helping, she found me and sat next to me. As seats filled, I sat there not wanting to talk to anyone. When people greeted me, I just nodded to them. I was having a really hard time not looking around to see if I could spot someone that might be my wife's AP. She sat beside me with her eyes closed, clutching her Bible, and I assumed she was praying. Normally, there are at least 30 minutes of worship singing before the pastor starts his sermon, but today, our pastor walked out and up to the pulpit. He stood there gathering his thoughts while people wondered what was going on. The pastor greeted everyone and apologized for the change. He said that today was a day that he'd been thinking about for a while, and he wanted to discuss spousal relationships. I could feel Mayeko stiffen beside me, but she didn't say anything. I was watching her out of the corner of my eye, and I saw her look to her left and a row ahead of us. A guy was sitting there with his wife, who had 3 kids ranging from 5 to early teens. I had seen him before and even said hello to him and his wife on many occasions. The pastor gave an impassioned sermon about the sanctity of marriage and quoted every verse in the Bible regarding infidelity and adultery. During the sermon, my wife reached out to take my hand, and I instinctively jerked it away from her. The commotion probably wouldn't have been noticed on any other normal day, but on this day, it was noticed by all of those around us. As the sermon came to a conclusion, the pastor discussed the sanctity of marriage and its importance in our lives. He then switched track and reminded everyone that we needed to embrace love, compassion, and the act of forgiveness. As he said this, his eyes were locked with mine, and he had a sad voice. I sat there in the pews without emotion, as I had already cried out over the last few days. My wife was sitting next to me, face locked into a mask that she was barely holding on to. There were tears openly streaming down her face, and I could sense the shame in her body language. Shame is powerful in Japanese culture, and Mieko was swimming in it. As the pastor closed his Bible, the entire congregation stayed seated. I turned and looked at my wife and simply said to her, in a voice that was clear to everyone, "When we came here today, I wasn't sure what to do, but now it's clear to me that you chose someone else." I told her, "The only thing left for me is to tell you that my love for you has limits. Even with the words of Scripture, I will not be your second choice." As I walked away, Mieko sobbed while following me. As we walked out of the pew, we passed by her AP and his family. He turned to look at my wife, and I paused. I couldn't help myself. Anger surged in me, and I told him between clenched teeth that I had given him the only warning I would ever give him. He looked away without a reply. His wife's eyes were wide open, and she started asking him what was going on as I left with my Mieko following me, crying. That was the last day we attended church. Later, I spoke to the pastor and told him I'd be taking some time to heal. My wife's culture made her feel like she needed to make some rounds to friends and family to apologize for how she had disgraced herself and how she had shamed me with her actions. Self-flagellation is a thing in Japanese culture. As news of her affair made the rounds through the local Japanese community, that's another story, she was invited out less and less. Eventually, she felt as if she didn't have a single friend. The next year was extremely hard on Mieko, to the point that she left and moved back to Japan. Our divorce was finalized, and I've moved on with my life. I still feel the betrayal as deeply now as the day that I found out she cheated on me. Her parents reached out to me once to ask for some details about what happened, so I explained it in detail, including sending them screenshots of the texts. I was told by some friends who still go to the church that her affair partner ended up in divorce and was disgraced enough that both he and his family stopped attending the church. At some point, I thought I would stop being angry, but that time hasn't come yet, and honestly, I don't think it will. I left my wife shortly after confronting her publicly. Yes, I know that was a jerk move, but I don't care. I ended up with the kids since my wife felt the need to go back to Japan, and I wouldn't agree to letting her take them out of the country, even for just a visit. I do set up time for them to do video chat with their mom every few days, and she's come back to the U.S. as needed. I have no idea what her plan is, and only communicate with her when it's absolutely necessary in regard to the kids. She still attempts to get me to talk to her, but I shut that down as soon as it starts. I know it's wrong to hate her, but I do. I can at least own that. I never speak ill of Mieko in front of the kids, but I will not sugarcoat it. When they ask about their mother, I simply tell them that we have divorced. At some point, when they get a little older, I'll explain what happened, but that won't be for a few years.
I only post new and unique content. Please like and subscribe.